All right, we shall begin. This will be one of those nights when you do not see me at all. I will be a voice from the invisible worlds. What this is about is I have been very unhappy with what we have done with the presidents. When we looked at them first, we looked at the inaugurations of each of the presidents. We were thinking or assuming or tentatively assuming that these were important days in their lives and that there would surely be progressions that indicated that as a high point of some kind or another. But what happened is we didn't find very much. So when we studied transits, we looked at the president's inaugurations with regard to transits. And we didn't find very much there either. It was a major disappointment. And so I've done 60 years of astrology, so I didn't think that astrology didn't work, but that maybe my assumption was wrong. Maybe the inauguration wasn't an important time, or at least an important time that could be indicated by astrology. So we set the matter aside for a while, and we looked at progressions and transits in my personal chart. And we looked at new moons and full moons and the whole lunation cycle, and nothing came of it. We got a good understanding of those things in my chart because they made sense, and I knew what were important times for me. So we are about to move on to something else, or complete our work on the most standard and common means for forecasting and predicting. We're about to move into another phase of that, and we want to finish what we have started. But before that, this was bothering me. So I tried to take one more look at the president's charts, the presidents that I have lived under, only this time I took not inaugurations, but I took what were, to me, very important times in the different presidents' lives, so that we could see if there was something happening then. So here we go. In this innermost circle is the natal chart. The middle circle is the progress chart, secondary progressions. And the outer circle is the transits for a given time. And so for each of these presidents, we're taking an important time. You can see it broken in this case. Way up here it says Pearl, and over here it says Harbor. I have to cut the images short in order to fit them on the screen so that you can see everything. So what this was the so-called surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, which caused us to declare war on Japan in the Second World War. The reason that I say supposedly surprised is that there is a conspiracy theory that the Japanese code had been broken before Pearl Harbor, and that they allowed Pearl Harbor to happen so that there would be just cause for war. I don't know if that's believable or not, but that's a theory that has been held for a long time. Always when there are matters of great import, there are conspiracy theories. All right, let's look a little bit at the horoscope. We have the sun down here in Aquarius. It's conjoined widely to Venus and very widely to the part of fortune. It forms a square with Saturn. And that square with Saturn, as well as the is responsible for his paralysis. Most usually, paralysis is associated with Pluto, and Pluto is square to Mercury down here in the 6th house, which would indicate that his paralysis was neural. And that means that it was not infantile paralysis, it was not polio, but it is most likely that it was Guillain-Barré disease. I can say that with some confidence because at one time I did a little minor study on people who did have polio, and they all had fairly close to the same configurations that indicated the polio, but that they were not there with Franklin Roosevelt. And so putting that all together indicates that it's more likely Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a neural condition. Mercury, beside being square to Saturn, forms a very strong trine to Mars, and it's in the 10th house. So he was a powerful speaker, and he was capable of imbuing courage in people. And that was his greatest gift to the world. He did have some blocks because Pluto is in the natal chart is square to Mercury, so not everything was hunky-dory, so to speak. The sun is also square to Neptune and Saturn. And this is a man that is capable of deception, and his big deception was almost never letting the public never allowing the public to see that he was in a wheelchair and greatly inhibited. All right. Now let's look and see what is ripe with the progressions. We're looking at the center circle now to see if at Pearl Harbor anything was ripe. If we look, we see the sun is in 11 degrees and 5 minutes of Aries, whereas the natal sun is in 11 degrees and 8 minutes of Aquarius. This is a sextile. Now this brings us something into the history of astrology that many great astrologers said that sometimes sextiles act like squares, and sometimes squares act like sextiles. It would be too much to go into the mathematics of it, but I think it is safe to say that this is one of these cases where a sextile acts like a square. So there's no doubt there. All right. When we look at progressions, we usually work from the innermost planets outward. And if we look at Venus, Venus is in 20 degrees of Aries, and it makes no aspects with anything in the natal chart. If we look at the progressed Mercury over here in the 6th house, it doesn't form anything close enough in an orb for that to be true. The next thing we look at is progressed Mars. Progressed Mars is up here in the 10th house, and it is in conjunct, or what some people call it, they have a fancy name for it now, but it indicates complications. And it's also very close to the situation with the progressed Sun over in the 7th house. Is there anything else? We look at Mars. Mars is, we look at Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the 8th house by progression, or in the 9th house by progression, and it makes no aspects. Saturn by progression is in the 11 degrees of Taurus, and it is exactly square the Sun. So we see this is a very strong coincidence. We find a lot of planets in the 11 of signs, and all of them involve the Sun. So this is clearly indication of a very significant time in his life. Now, to look at the final thing of this before moving on to the transits, the Moon is in 9 degrees of Virgo, and that doesn't seem to do anything in particular. However, when you're dealing with the moon actually moves 12 degrees a day. So I don't know exactly the time. I didn't check exactly the time when Pearl Harbor occurred in the chart of Franklin Roosevelt. All right, let's look at the transits. Now we are looking at the outer ring. We're looking at the transits of all the outer planets. First, we look to the slowest moving, which is Pluto, and Pluto is opposite to Venus, but I don't know that that is meaningful. It means that it was some kind of a day to him, but I don't have an interpretation of that, of how meaningful it was. Neptune is the next inmost planet, and it's in 29 degrees of Virgo, and that is forms nothing in the natal chart that's important, but it is in the first house, and that indicates something like sneaky things or disguised or hidden things, and it could have something to do, but it is not as strong as the things that we saw from the progressions. Then we look next at Uranus, which is up here, and Uranus is on top of Pluto. And this is very exact. It's only 10 minutes off. So this is clearly a time that there is an assertion of power that has to take place. And you might say that this is a time of mental paralysis rather than physical paralysis. And there is an excitation of that aspect, but it's now has to do with the use of power. If we look at the next planet, it's Saturn, and Saturn is in 23 degrees of Taurus, and it is moving up to a conjunction of Jupiter. Indicating that it's going to be a positive time for him eventually, but right now it is a difficult time. And I don't know that that has much to do with the situation. Let's look to Jupiter. Jupiter is in 16 degrees of Gemini, and it does not form any aspects with the natal planets. So what we draw from this, the conclusion that we draw from this, is that this was a very important time in his life, and it is a time that was basically unpleasant by both the involving the sun, and it put him in a position that he had to make decisions, and he had to make decisions under duress. So is this an indication that astrology as we know it works? Very clearly, yes. All right, now let's move on to the next one. All right, we'll get it there. I'm finally learning how to use this thing right. All right. All right. This is the horoscope of Harry S. Truman. Again, we're following the same thing where the inmost circle is the natal chart. If we look at the natal chart, we see the sun in the I don't know how well suited I am to this technical world that I have put myself. The sun is in the 8th house, a house of secrecy, a house of mystery, a house of shared finances. And if you remember when we've looked at this chart before, we have said that the sun makes two very significant aspects. For one, it is square to Mars. And as presidents go, he had served in the army, and he was very much a military man and was willing to square off with anyone. In fact, he battled with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he has one of the most famous quotes in history. He was at a press conference, and somebody asked him, we were told that you gave the Joint Chiefs of Staff hell. And Harry Truman said, no, I told them the truth, but to them it sounded like hell. So he was a confrontational person, and he was willing to fight, willing to go to war. The other aspect that the sun makes is a trine to the moon in the 12th house. And that's very positive. This basically, like, for example, when it comes to sacred ceremonies among the Tibetan Buddhists, they do their sacred ceremonies 10 days after the new moon. And 10 days after the new moon is when the moon is trining the sun and waxing, which is probably the most favorable time in the entire lunation cycle. So this is something very favorable, a very positive accomplishment. The cycle of sun and moon is the cycle of accomplishment, and we see that for him, his life was an accomplishment, but it was not. It was not for the world to see. Even though he is president and all, it was not for the world to see. All right. Looking at some of the other planets, Mercury, for instance, is conjoined to Pluto, and that we find that a Mercury-Pluto aspect that can go either positively or negatively is very similar to what we saw with Franklin Roosevelt just a few minutes ago. Sometimes it indicates a speech impediment, and sometimes it indicates that he speaks forcefully. He has a very concentrated mind. If we look to Venus, Venus is in, up here, it is in the 9th house, right there it is, and it's just got into Cancer. It's not making any particular aspects of importance. Are there any other things in here? Yes, we looked at Mars. Jupiter is up in the 10th house, and it's sextile to Uranus in the 12th house. But those are basically the most important aspects in his chart. So we want to look and see if there are any progressions that would indicate that the time. Obviously, we can see up here, we can see atomic and bomb. My thinking here is that it certainly had to be an important time in the life of Harry Truman when the first atomic bomb that the world had ever known was dropped on Japan. Now, astrologically, or the timing of astrology in this is difficult because you don't know when the decision was made. We know exactly when the bomb was dropped, which is when this horoscope was cast for, but we don't know when the decision was made. So we're mildly in the blind. All right, let's take a look and see what is what. If we look at the progressed sun, we see the progressed sun is just working its way up to a sextile to the natal sun. The same thing we saw in the Franklin Roosevelt chart. It is clear that this is, again, one of those trying sextiles. Eventually, things were not easy for him. Let's just leave it at that. Let's look at progressed Venus. Progressed Venus is in 24 of Cancer, and it is sextile to natal Uranus. In this case, I think we have to take that he was riding on, he was riding on a wave of popularity, that many people were not aghast at him dropping the bomb. This indicates that the populace would look at this favorably. If you have a natal chart and you have Venus in the 10th house, you have a situation where you have somebody who is socially very, very popular, even if Venus is afflicted. In this case, it is positive. All right, if we look at next at Mercury, progressed Mercury, it's not in a place where it does anything special. If we look at progressed Mars, Mars is in 16 degrees of Virgo. That is also not something special. If we look at the progressed Jupiter, we see that it is in 8 degrees of Leo, and it is sextile to the natal Saturn, indicating that this was probably a very judicious decision. He's in a period of life where he's capable of exercising great judgment. Now there's a rare thing in here. We don't normally look at progressions of the outer planets, but once in a while something rare happens. If we look at the natal chart, we see that we saw that Pluto conjoins Mercury, but very slowly, as life progressed, Pluto moved forward, and at this time, Pluto was conjoined to Mercury. And this indicates that by progressions, that this is a time that he has to use his mind as a way of expressing power. And that's exactly what came up. This was a decision made from power. All right, let's look at the transits. We work from the outside in. Pluto is in Leo, 9 degrees, and that is sextile to the natal Saturn, which indicates again that this is a very controlled use of power. It is, this is quite exact. So we can say that this was a serious, sober thing. It wasn't a matter of him saying, well, let's zap those Japs. It wasn't that at all. This was a very controlled judgment that he made. If we look at the transiting Neptune in the 12th house, nothing happening there in terms of transits. If we look at Uranus, Uranus is up in the 9th house and it's at 16 degrees, and that is exactly square to the moon. And that is sometimes an indication of hysteria, but I would think that it meant that this was not as sober and as careful as this decision was. I don't think that he realized the shock. An atomic bomb is a horrible, horrible thing. And to have unleashed that, I think emotionally it was very trying for him, and this is what that indicates. If we look next to Saturn transit, Saturn is at 18 degrees, nothing special there. If we look at Jupiter transit, Jupiter transit is in the 12th house. It's in 26 degrees. It's sextile, its natal position. Again, I think that indicates some kind of good judgment. Jupiter in a natal chart, when Jupiter is in Virgo as it is here, that's somebody who can solve a detective novel before the last chapter of the book. It's that kind of analysis. So the first question we ask, is this a vindication of the standard methods of astrology for predicting and forecasting? Again, we have a resounding yes. There is no doubt about it at all. What did it mean in his life? It meant the horrible, horrible thing of having to exercise enormous power. And I don't know if the first bomb was a uranium bomb or a plutonium bomb. The two bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were two different types of atomic bombs. I believe one of them was plutonium and one of them was uranium. And I don't know which was which, but in any case, it's clear that in terms of responsible judgment, he exercised and weighed things very carefully and had to use power that had never been used before and did so. What can we say? Emotionally, it was extremely, extremely hard on him. All right, let's move on to the next chart. I had problems with the next chart, and we'll come up with, we'll see them eventually here. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. This is the third president I lived under. It is Dwight David Eisenhower, popular war general, and a man that had many great moments in his life. Many. He's had to deal with the Korean War. He was supreme commander of the Second World War, and he was president. And so he had many great moments, and to decide which great moment to try to see the validity of astrology and to understand what that moment meant to him was not an easy thing to do. So what I did is I took the horoscope of D-Day when we invaded Europe. And he was in charge of the invasion of Europe in the Second World War. We're talking about June 6, 1944. First, we look at the natal horoscope, and we look at, in the natal horoscope, at a revolving conjunction of Sun, Moon, and Uranus. This is going to be quite a remarkable person. Somebody born under a new moon is at the start of things. He is an initiator. But it's in Libra, so he is a, how would you say it, a compromising initiator. He's not one to make all of the decisions on his own. There are many positive aspects in this. For example, if we look at Saturn in the first house, forms a very strong trine with Mars in the fifth house, and that is associated with how people get things done. It can be mechanics, but I have a friend who is a broker and understands how the market works and can help people to how to deal with their investments, because they understand how the market is going and how it works and things of that nature. So this is a very positive aspect. Then there is Mercury in the first house is trying to Jupiter in the fifth house, and it is trine to the planets in the 10th house. This is somebody who's going to be very, very famous. I said Mercury's in the first house, that's actually in the second. Excuse me. This is somebody who's going to be famous, but there's going to be a lot of, when you see Neptune involved with fame, there's a lot of true and false charisma. The image that people have of him may not be true. As a general, he was a GI's general. They liked him because he was an everyday man. He didn't hold himself aloof, even though he had all the power and had rank over everyone. He didn't carry himself that way. He carried himself as basically one of the guys. All right, those are some of the basics. Venus is in the 6th house, and it's opposite the planets in the 10th house. And we don't like to air dirty laundry, but the Venus opposite Neptune he was famous for having side pieces, are what they call them now. I don't know where this language comes from, but he was famous for having secret lovers, and that was his reality. No person is perfect, and we all have difficulties. All right. At the same time, Venus was sextile to Jupiter and Mercury. So it wasn't all bad. He probably, I don't know how to say all of these things. With Venus sextile Jupiter in the 5th house, he probably knew how to show the ladies a good time. I don't know how to say it anymore. He knew how to relax, and his farm at Gettysburg has now become a retreat for presidents. All right. Let's try to look at what we're trying to do with all of this. If we look first to the sun, the progressed sun is conjoined the dragon's tail. Now that's something I don't have experience with. I don't at all. It's the progressed dragon's tail and not the natal. Only on rare occasions have I been called on to use dragon's tail aspects, and in those cases it was obvious. In this case it isn't obvious. Venus is in 10 degrees of Sagittarius, and nothing going on there. If we look at Mercury is at 25 degrees of Sagittarius, and nothing going on there. If we look at progressed Mars, it's at 22 degrees of Aquarius, and that's trining those planets in the 2nd house. It's a good time to be assertive. It's not in any particular aspect at this time, but it does indicate that in the future, when it comes trying to the moon and Uranus, that he's going to have a lot of success. And all right, so we're not finding a lot of astounding things here that prove astrology. Jupiter is progressed Jupiter is in 9 degrees of Aquarius, and that does nothing special. If we look at progressed Saturn, progressed Saturn is square the dragon's tail, and I don't know how to address that. It's when it's square to the north node and the south node, I don't know what to say. All I can say is that with Saturn progressed in the 1st house, or Saturn in the 1st house, He doesn't come to decisions easily, and this was no exception. Now, the only progressed planet that we really want to look at is the moon. And the moon, depending on the time of the day, is going to pass over all of these planets. And that is pretty significant. The effects of a progressed moon don't last very long. As we've been looking at transits and progressions in these talks, we've been saying that that's one of the things that when we start out with, large periods of time, like a quarter of your life or something like that, when you get to the progressed moon, you're dealing with something that lasts a few days at most. So it is likely that the progressed moon passes over these planets on the day of D-Day. That makes it a big day by itself alone, but it's not the most monumental day in his life. But if you're dealing with an invasion of a country, of a continent actually, if you're dealing with that, you were trying to establish a beachhead, which is what D-Day was all about. That's you don't care about what's going to happen a few months ahead. You want to make that beachhead, and so having this aspect, and that makes this aspect more relevant than would normally be considered. All right. Now let's turn to the transits. Looking at Pluto first. Pluto is exactly sextile to its natal position. Again, we deal with the application of power. And we know from that grand trine that the natal Pluto is in that this is clearly a high point of his honor, of his, if the 10th house is your most high point in life, whether it's in society or in your profession or your career, that's your high point. And Pluto being sextile to that indicates that this is a pretty important time. All right. We look next to Neptune. Neptune is conjoined to Mercury, to the natal Mercury, and Mercury rules the ascendant. Now, this is not only an indication that astrology works in this case, but it gives an indication of what was at stake. The Germans weren't stupid, and they weren't without knowledge. They had reconnaissance, but they didn't know exactly where or exactly when an invasion was going to take place. So there had to be an element of subterfuge, and that element of subterfuge is what is involved. So the transiting Neptune, conjoined the natal Mercury, indicates trickery. It means outsmarting them as to where it looks like the invasion is going to take place, and they were successful with that. So it's really fascinating how all of these things work out. All right. Uranus, by transit, is up in the 9th house, but it is not, clearly is not close enough to any aspect, transiting aspect, to be significant. So then we look to Saturn next, and Saturn is not in a position, it's already past the position of the trine. And I think that has to do with things earlier in the war, and I don't know for sure whether it has to do with the African situation or not. I didn't brush up quickly on my World War II history. All right, and then we look to Jupiter, and Jupiter is sextile to the Sun, and things will go favorably. In the old days, and I can't speak responsibly that way, but I can't speak irresponsibly that way, I would say with Pluto involved and Jupiter from the 12th house, I would say that there were forces behind the scenes, you might say occult forces, helping him, but I can't say that responsibly now because I do not have specific or definite knowledge of that kind. Are there any other transits that are important? Not that I can see. The transiting moon is the transiting moon is down in the 4th house, and it's right on top of his sun, so that indicates the moment of it. Again, we don't know the exact time of it, but the transiting moon is of the moment. So we are ready to ask our questions. Does astrology or the traditional tools of astrology involving progressions and transit, is it successful in describing this? It's a definite yes, but not a resounding yes. This may not have been the most overwhelmingly significant day in his life. It was important, but not super important. Is this true to his life? Well, wait, we have to talk about the answer in the first question. By progressions, there is not a lot by progression that indicates the significance of this day. But by the transits, there are numerous things that make it. So that the progressions would indicate things that were coming ripe in his inner character and how they could be applied to the situation at hand. And that wasn't important at this time for him. But the transits indicate how one responds to the world, getting a gist of what's in the wind and working with that. And that clearly is what is at hand, and that's what this chart is all about. All right, we're going awfully slow with this. I'll have to decide whether I want to do this one more time. All right. Oops, wrong way. All right. We have moved up one president, and we can see by the date that I chose as significant in his life. I didn't choose the assassination. I didn't want to get into that. I chose the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is when, this is after Fidel Castro had overtaken, Fidel and Che Guevara had overtaken Cuba. and they turned it into a communist state. And there was the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, where we tried to overthrow Castro, which was not well planned and it didn't work. Castro sensed he would, because of that and because of other things, it was clearly obvious, only just being a few miles away from the United States and vulnerable to a government that didn't care for communism at all, which leads me to stand on a soapbox for a few minutes. I believe that all of the presidents since the Castro overthrow have made enormous mistakes with regard to Cuba. We have the people of Cuba love United States, but we make life very terrible for them with embargoes and everything else, that it would be much easier to help the people come to power on their own if we were not squeezing the government so hard and making life miserable for them. So that's a personal political opinion. I think it's more a matter of statecraft than a political opinion. But that's what I feel about this. All right. So what happened is that Castro realized that he was in a vulnerable position, and he applied to Russia to be a big brother, to help out. And Russia had a very big influence. I have Cuban friends who have left Cuba because they were not communists. And to this day, they complain about not learning English, but having to learn Russian, which they didn't care for at all. But at any rate, Russia was going to install missiles pointing at the United States. This is not an unusual tactic. We have missiles in Turkey pointing at Russia. But when the double standard applies, when they become pointed at the United States, not acceptable at all. So when they were discovered, Kennedy, whose horoscope this is, stood up to Gorbachev and says, take them out or we have war. And all of the B-52s were in the air, and the covers were off of the missile silos, and it was a very tense situation, and Gorbachev relented. Now that's not the end of the story. The story goes on because eventually Kennedy and Gorbachev had plans for peace between the two countries, which may be part of the reason why Kennedy was assassinated. But you got some, there are some very not nice things that we do, that we have crazy ideas. Like one, for example, is that churches have to have debts, otherwise they're not financially responsible. I know of a case where a church got out of debt, and one of the elders in the church says, we've got to put on an addition or something, because if we don't, we won't be responsible with what the tithes are that people give us. That's one kind of an example of phony thinking that people get. Another one is, and that applies here, some people believe that a country is not strong unless it has enemies. And so people did not want to have peace with Russia. They did not want to have that kind of thing. And some people believe that the Kennedy-Gorbachev plans were scuttled for that reason. All right, we can look a little bit at the chart. The sun doesn't make many aspects. The sun is here in the 8th house. It doesn't make many aspects at all. But there's a stellium there, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and that stellium sextile Saturn and widely trines the moon. So these are a lot of talents that he has. Again, good judgment, and with Mars leading the whole business off, courage. He has the courage to do things, to stand up. Now in the stellium, the Jupiter part is sextile to Saturn, where the Mars part is not, but because of overlapping influences, it works in. The Jupiter part with Saturn is good judgment, where the Mars part with the moon indicates a quite virile emotional stance about things. The sun is mildly sextile to Neptune, but it's not a strong aspect at all. Venus is square to the moon, and how can you say it? He was a womanizer and used his office for womanization. I don't know if there's such a word as womanization. All right, we want to see in the Cuban Missile Crisis if there was anything present. At that time, the progressed sun was right between the sextile to Mercury and Jupiter. It was working, and let's look at the progressed Mercury at the same time. So this indicates that it is a time when he can exercise his mind and he can do so boldly. Is there anything with the progressed Venus? Not really. Are there any other progressions that count? Progressed Mars? No. Progressed Jupiter? No. So there are no other. So we have the sextiles. Again, we don't know whether these sextiles are all positive sextiles or whether they're all negative sextiles. But in this event, or things surrounding this event, not exact aspects, but enough to indicate a period of activity in his life. The question is, are those sextiles positive sextiles, or are they negative, as they were with Harry Truman or Franklin Roosevelt? So by the progressions, we have that. The progressed moon, probably we don't, events usually, the build-up to events usually comes before it shows up astrologically. What I'm trying to say that is that the missile crisis, the intelligence about it, and the period of understanding of what to do actually was before Kennedy says, get out. And that would be around the time that the moon would have been passing over the sextiles that were touched off. So this is not a specific event, but it's more like a high point period in what was called the Cold War. And that period in Kennedy's chart is indicated by these sextiles which were activated at this time. And the activation of this event was probably, or most likely, when the moon passed over the planets that are in that sextile in the 8th house. And that indicates also that it might have been responsible for his death, but we don't want to go into that. I don't want to get into Kennedy conspiracies. Now let's look at some transits. Again, beginning with Pluto. Pluto is in 11 degrees. It's in the degree, it's sextile and trine the dragon's head and dragon's tail. I don't know if that's meaningful. It may be, but I don't know that it is necessarily so. Neptune is just past the position of the dragon's head and the dragon's tail with nothing else that it does. Uranus, Uranus is up here in the 11th house, and it is again in 11 degrees, and that is a degree, oh, that's in 3 degrees, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's sextile to Pluto, sextile to Pluto. That's as far as we can go. Oh, it is trying to progress Jupiter. I don't know if that is meaningful. Let's look to transiting Saturn. Transiting Saturn is in 4 degrees of Aquarius. Not necessarily something important. Transiting Jupiter is down here in the 5th house, 3 degrees. Not something. It is trine to Pluto. I don't know how important that is. We seem to be seeing in all of these incidents that are critical to world affairs. I didn't notice that when I was making notes for these talks, but it seems that in these critical moments, Pluto seems to be very, very important. Now, the way I would interpret that personally is that this indicates that there is a powerful master who in the spiritual hierarchy that has a say in this and how power is distributed to the world. All right, let's ask our questions. The first question is does this vindicate astrology? Yes, but only mildly so. Either this event is not important or the astrology is not as significant as it has been in all the other charts we looked at. We can't say that there is nothing happening, but there isn't a whiz-bang clear situation. What can we say about this for John Kennedy is that for him it was a judgment question, and that speaking as an independent person, he exercised judgment quite well. He was willing to go to war, but he weighed, before he made his bluff, he weighed his cards. All right. Is this more in the development of Kennedy, or is it just a response to what's happening in the air? If it is a development in the character of Kennedy, it would be from the progressions, which it clearly is. From the transit, it's not so much. He's not just, this is not just a knee-jerk reaction to what is in the air. Boy, we're going terribly slow. I'm having a good time. I'm hoping you are too, and I hope you're getting some of the astrology out of this, and maybe you might have something more to say beyond what I've said. If so, you know from the banner that's at the beginning, you know where to send in questions and comments. Okay. Once again, we can look in the corners and see what this is. This says the Tonkin Resolution. I didn't know what to... Again, some of these people have quite eventful lives. I could have taken the assassination of Kennedy and his becoming president, but we've looked at that already. We could have taken when he became Speaker of the House or when he became a senator. But I chose to look at the Tonkin Resolution, and I don't know whether it's that important or not. The Tonkin Resolution is what brought the United States into the Vietnamese War. In the Gulf of Tonkin, one of our naval ships supposedly, now this is all conjecture, got too close to North Korean waters, and the ship was fired on, supposedly. As far as I know, there is nothing to indicate that these things really happened. But this was reported to Congress, and Congress overwhelmingly took Lyndon Johnson's request to bring all the troops and munitions and equipment into the Vietnamese War. I think only 2 people voted against it, and one of them was Wayne Morris, who is a lovable man. He could see through all of this. So the whole question is I didn't know whether this was an important period in his life, because the Vietnam War, because it was so unpopular with the young people who were escaping the country to not be drafted, and the colleges, there were demonstrations all over the place. And as we can see in this horoscope, there are a lot of planets in Virgo, and Virgo is a sign that is very thin-skinned. And he took all of the demonstrations and unhappiness of the people to heart, and he resigned. He said, I'm not running for office again. Now, when he made that announcement, that would have been an important date also, but I didn't take that. I took the proposal of the Gulf of Tonkin. All right, let's look a little bit at the chart. The big thing about this chart is there are all of these planets in Virgo. We have Mars is conjoined to the Sun. The Sun is just barely conjoined to the Moon, and the Moon is strongly conjoined to Jupiter, to Mercury. The Moon and Mercury are trine to Uranus over in the 5th house. And those are the main aspects. There is a wide sextile to Neptune, but I don't know whether that's has much to say. the planets in the early part of the conjunction, the Mars and the part of Fortune and the Sun, form no significant aspects. You can say that there is a wide sextile with Pluto because Pluto is in 27 in Gemini and it'll carry over into Cancer. All these planets that in that revolving conjunction, you would like to say that they form a in conjunct with Saturn, but that is not so. We can learn something about astrology while we're doing this, and that is if there is a lot of conjunctions, you don't expect a lot of other aspects because there are not a lot of other aspects that can take place when everything is all in one place. The fact that there are the trines to Uranus is remarkable in itself. All right. Now we want to begin to look at the progressions. The Sun, by progression, is at 28 degrees of Libra. That does not form any progressed aspects. Progressed Venus is in 15 degrees of Virgo, and it sextiles, because it's almost virtually in 16 degrees, it sextiles Neptune. But I don't know that that is what is involved with the Tonkin resolution. If we look at the progressed Mercury, progressed Mercury is in 11 degrees of Scorpio. It's sextile, its natal position, and I imagine that, and it's passing out of orbit with its natal position and moving into the sextile with Uranus. Being in Scorpio, it's a little hawkish, but I can't say that that would be what is involved in wanting to go to war with this positioning. Looking at progressed Jupiter. Now, Jupiter by progression is in 7 degrees and 49 minutes of Virgo, and surprisingly, it doesn't aspect any of these planets in Virgo or any of the sextiles that come out of it. So we're seeing there's a paucity of progressed aspects here. We've already looked at progressed Mars, I guess. No, that's the only aspect that there is. Progressed Mars is pulling up opposite to Saturn, which would indicate a frustration. The orb is too weak because Mars moves too slowly. You can see that he's coming to a period of frustration in his life, and he's not a happy man, but I don't think you can say that is enough to want to have the Tonkin resolution passed. Now, if we look at all of the progressions, we haven't looked at the progressed moon, and the progressed moon is here in 26 degrees of Virgo, and again, there's this square to Pluto. Pluto keeps coming up in these things again and again and again. All of these cases where there are decisions about war, Pluto seems to be very strong. But that's the only aspect. So we can say that this is not something that is taking the best advantage of his talents in the way that the best advantage of Kennedy's talents were taken in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We can almost say, with the exception of the progressed moon, that there are no progressed aspects of any significance. So, does that invalidate astrology? We'll have to see. We'll have to look at the transits first. All right, looking at Pluto. Pluto's in the first house. It's at 12 degrees. It's just coming off the conjunction of Mercury and the Moon, and it is moving to the trine of Uranus. It's very close. It's less than half a degree from the exact trine. So we can say that Pluto is again involved here, but it's in a positive way with that kind of trine. Are there any other Pluto aspects? I think not. All right. Neptune is down here in Scorpio, and it's in 15 degrees. It is trine to its natal position. I don't know how to say this. It would indicate, if the Tonkin resolution was fake, it would indicate that this is a somewhat likely kind of situation where somebody could pull off a fraud or could pull off a misunderstanding of it all. Looking to Uranus. Oops. I'm looking at a sheet of paper at the same time I'm looking at the computer, and it's a very funny situation. All right, Uranus is in the first house. It's in 8 degrees of Virgo, and it is moving up to the conjunction of the Moon, and in fact it's very close to the conjunction of the Moon. It's again less than half a degree from the conjunction of the Moon. This indicates this brings out this trine of the Moon and Mercury trine to Uranus. We see that is stimulated by several things in the transits. And we're saying that you might say, with Uranus being that active and this many planets involved with it, you might say that this is being done on a hunch. We have the Pluto saying there may be a power behind this situation, making this a very grave and heavy situation, the Pluto being square to Uranus. But there's still a hunch. Maybe it is under duress of a grave attitude that he does this. Looking at Saturn, Saturn is near its home position. Oh, no, there. Saturn is at 2 degrees. It's opposite Mars, and that's certainly bellicose. That looks warlike. If we look at Jupiter, Jupiter is up in the 9th house, very close to the midheaven, conjoined the midheaven. And I don't think that makes any aspects. No, it does not. All right. Now it's time to ask for, is astrology valid? From the progressions, it doesn't look like there's anything happening. Nothing happening much at all. So this is not something that has come from him. You can't say that this has come from his ambition or his waxing feeling of power. If anything, because the only progression that there is the Moon square to Pluto, if anything, he's under the weight, heavy weight of power and authority. So it would almost look like astrology was invalid, except if you say that it was not something that came out of him. But when we look at the transits, we find that there are several transits, and the most striking being the Pluto opposite Mars, and Mars is conjoined the ascendant. It's in the first house. That very definitely looks bellicose. And again, there is a Pluto-Uranus aspect that all of the energy being focused on Pluto, on Uranus indicates this is a kind of a chancy thing. The Neptune transits indicate, yes, there might be something, the wool might be pulled over our eyes, but it very definitely looks like a response to what's happening in the transiting in the world at this time. He's responding to the times, and he's not working from his own character. Whoa. All right. Do we have time to do another? I think not. We're almost at something like 80 minutes. I hope you got something out of this. I had a great time doing this. I have come to a lot of understandings and willingness to share, and I don't know if I want to continue this. If you would like this continued, leave a message at that address, 99fots@gmail.com, whether you want it to go on or not. And I'll use that to make my decision. Thank you very much. It has been a fun time. I hope we've learned some astrology, and I hope we've learned something about destiny. I have. Okay.